Alright guys, welcome back. Today I'm going to show you this Buick 455 that I've been tearing apart the past couple days. Tell you what my plans with it is. I'm planning on putting in that 79 Grand Prix SJ. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it into a turbo motor. What I'm going to do is just regap the rings. I'm not going to put any upgraded pistons or rods in it. Because honestly, what I'm going to do is not going to be pushing it too hard. I'm just planning on running about 5 or 6 pounds of boost just to get my hands on. But this is really just a stock 1976 Buick 455. My dad built it about 10, 12, 15 years ago. He put in his rat rod over there. It started puking up coolant. And it wasn't just, a little bit. It was actively pushing the coolant out of the radiator. So I'm thinking maybe a blown head gasket or maybe a cracked head. We got the heads off. The head gaskets didn't look to be in bad shape, but, looks can be deceiving. It could have blown a head gasket and it not be, really visible of where it blew out or something. So I'm going to take the heads and get them, sonic checked, magnafluxed, whatever. Get it checked out so that I can make sure there's no cracks in the heads. What I'm going to do for sure, though, is, don't mind this motor, is I'm going to take those these two heat crossovers. I'm going to find a way to plug them so that I don't get my intake heated up, because heat kills. Especially with turbo, whenever it's even more heat. But anyway, so these should be stock connecting rods and stock pistons. The pistons do look stock. They still got the little dimple in the middle. So my dad didn't go too crazy whenever he built this. I think he just put a 70 model cam in it, put new bearings and gaskets in it, and that was it. So I'm going to finish tearing this apart. I'm going to see if I can salvage any of the rings. I'd like to reuse the stock rings if possible, because I'm trying to build this for as cheap as possible. I know I'm going to have to buy a blow-off valve and a wastegate, which is going to be, $300-400. But this motor, I've done some horse trading with my dad and got it. He has been keeping it for, untelling how long. So I'm going to try and build this as cheap as possible. I got that car for really, really cheap on a really good deal. I believe in 76 it had, I believe, still well over 400 pound-feet of torque, but I could be wrong. But once I'm going to keep the thick head gaskets on it. I'm going to put the stock heads back on it. My dad already done a little porting to him. I'm going to go back and make sure everything's nice and cleaned up. I'm going to let the machine shop hot tank this block, get it all cleaned out, check it for cracks, and see where I go. But I'll catch up with you whenever I get all these pistons out, and we'll see what the next step is. All right, I got it all apart. From what I could tell, the bearings looked really good. I mean, the crank looks really still nice and polished. I don't know if my dad took the crank and got it turned or anything or polished. I don't know if he put new bearings in the rods or not. I do know he put new head gaskets in the cam in. That's all I really know. He done it so long ago that I don't think he remembers. But everything went smoothly except for, piston falling out and hitting my toe. But I'll live, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and start working on these heads. I'm going to take one of these heads apart, probably this one. I'm going to take the rocker shaft off, and I'm going to take a valve spring compressor. I'm going to take the valve spring out, but put the keeper and the retainer back on. And then I'm going to use a set of digital calipers to measure the distance between here to the bottom, or brain fart, from the bottom of the retainer to the top of the valve seal, or the bottom of the keeper, whatever's lowest to the bottom, top of the valve seal. so I can measure how much distance I have. Say it's 470 thousandths of an inch, then I know that I can run roughly about 450 thousandths lift, just to give me a rough estimate of what I can run with the stock, retainer set up and with these stock heads. I know on small block Chevy, some heads have a further up valve seal, like a perch, I guess you could say. So I'm just going to measure that, see how much lift I can handle safely, and see where I go from there. All right, guys, let me catch you up to speed. So I've got the block taken completely apart, except for the crank. I need to take this sensor out, the strap, the motor mounts. Just finished tearing it completely down, as I'm going to be taking it to the machine shop to let them, go through, hone it out, make sure all the cylinders are completely the same size, hot tank it, check it for cracks, put new cam bearings in. I know these Buicks have a issue with oiling. If this front cam bearing gets wiped out, then it cuts off oiling to the whole right side or driver's side of the motor. So I'm going to get new cam bearing. There's T8 Performance, I believe it is, makes a double grooved cam bearing on the back side. So if it's installed at 7 and 3, I believe it is, it allows oiling to get to the driver's side of the motor. Even if the cam bearing gets wiped out, just be safe with it. Which that's my goal with this build, is just make a good, safe, powerful motor. So I'm gonna get it milled, make sure the head surfaces are nice and straight and flat, because it did have an issue puking up coolant. So I'm gonna make sure that the heads are crack free. I'm gonna make sure that they're flat. I'm gonna check my clearance for to see how much lift I can have with my valves. Check underneath the valve spring retainer to the top of the valve seal. Check and see how many thousandths of an inch that is, and then I'll be able to find me a cam that'll have enough overlap to survive. But overall, I mean, the bores look good. I mean, they're nice and smooth. They ain't got no deep scratches or scores. But I have been going through and using cylinder number 1 as my base. I've been gapping all these rings to about 30 thousandths of an inch. It's maybe a little overkill for this motor, what I plan on doing, because I'm still going to be rocking the stock rods and stock pistons. But I do want to just ensure that I don't have a ring that closes up and breaks out a piston. So my plans are to get this running. I'd like to be in the realm of 500 pound-feet of torque, which ain't really that unreasonable with this motor stock. 1970 Buick GS Stage 1 had 510 pound-feet of torque. And it was probably underrated a little bit. But my plan is, it's going to be a low compression motor right out of the gate. I'm going to be shooting for hopefully about 7.5 to 1 compression with it, how it sits. That way I know that I'm going to be safe whenever I start putting boost on it, because I plan on putting a little turbo on it, running about 6 pounds of boost, just to get, if say I'm at about 500 pound-feet of torque, if I add 6 pounds of boost, I'll be well over 700 pound-feet, which will be more than enough for a little Grand Prix, stock transmission, stock drive shaft, stock rear end. As long as I don't get traction, that sumbitch should survive. So anyway, I'm going to finish gapping up these rings, and I'll let y'all know how it goes. All right, guys, welcome back. So I got my block back from the machine shop. Everything checked out perfectly. Had him hone the cylinders, put new cam bearings in, new freeze plugs. Just hot tank the block, check it for cracks. Just go through it, make sure everything was good. Whenever my dad had in his truck, where it kept puking out coolant, I just want to make sure that everything was good with the block and the heads. Heads checked out perfect. So it's time to put this back together. I've already put the new cam in. I had to take it back and let them adjust the cam bearing because these older blocks, sometimes the bore ain't completely circular. So I had to adjust the cam bearing to put the cam in, but now the cam's in, it turns nice. Set the crank down in place, put the both rope seals in, the bottom rope seal, cut it flush, put the top rope seal on. The main cap, I've put the main caps in place. I torqued them down once, but I just loosened them back up as my crank in play was a little off. I don't know if it was just a little too tight, if I torqued them a little too tight, because with these Buicks, there's about 3 different torque settings that people always talk about. You can do 90, 90 foot-pounds, 100 foot-pounds, or 110 foot-pounds. I went with 110 as that was the first thing that I found, and the crank was just a little too tight, so I'm going to go back, torque it back down to 90 foot-pounds and see how that does. Hopefully it'll keep the crank loose enough to where it will still turn. Because before I couldn't hardly turn it, so I think it was just a little too tight. But now it feels good. It's a little tight, but that's being expected considering I put assembly lube on each of these main caps. The assembly lube, where it's so thick, it kind of makes everything stick together. But for right now, I'm going to go back through, torque it back down to, I'm going to start at 30 pound-feet, then 60, and then I'm going to jump up to maybe 95 or 100. And I'm going to do this in increments just to make sure that's a nice, smooth transition with all the main caps. Just be doubly sure. You know, you don't want to get it too tight immediately. You don't want to get it too loose immediately. So there's 30 pound-feet. And how I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the inside out. So, okay. So, torque down to 30 pound-feet. Now I'm going to tighten it up to 60. Perfect. Go back through and torque it down. Okay. Now before I go through and torque this third step, I'm going to make sure that the crank still turns over well. Let me get it set. I'll probably do 90, and then if I go on up to 100 foot-pounds or whatnot, I'll probably do it in one more increment. But oh yeah, she still turns nice and smooth. And I'm not hitting any So I don't know. That's one of the reasons why I loosened up all these main caps, is I kept hearing like a scraping. I'm guessing maybe one of the counterweights was just barely tickling one of these main caps. So I went back through, loosened them all up, making sure everything's nice and good. Just, I've seen people take and check in play by sticking a screwdriver in here and pushing on the counterweights to push the crank up to one side and then to the next, and then kind of get it centered, but I didn't. You know, I'm trying to show you all that anyone can do this stuff, and that's something that you really need a dial indicator or something to kind of test the in play in the crank. Don't have to worry about it. I mean, this is still the stock crank, still a stock end caps, the bearings are new, but that's it. So it should still have the same end play as an original block and crank that's never been taken apart. Okay, now I'm going to make sure that the crank spins good still. Oh, perfect. And all I was doing was just making sure that I didn't hear it hitting anywhere. So I didn't hear anything, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up. I'm going to split the difference between the 90 and 110 that I've been seeing the range of, and just go smack down. I've been in the middle at 100 even. You know, some people put plastic gauge in there and check it. I don't have any on hand, so I'm just gonna go and see if the crank starts feeling a little tight to turn. Then I'm gonna untorque all these, just loosen them all back up to where you can move them with your finger, and go back through and torque them to say 95 foot-pounds. That'll be 5 foot-pounds less than what I'm doing right now, and see if it's any better. If it's still too tight, then I'll go back down to 90 and just do it like that. That way I can see if it's going to be too tight or if not. And just do it the old-fashioned, you know, can you feel a difference or not? Okay. I don't feel any difference, so I'm going to call that good. So that was the main cap's torque down to 100 pound-feet of torque. So that should be good for all these. And that is wet. So I did put some assembly lube on each of the threads. It's probably not the best thing to use. You probably should use just regular motor oil because it's a little thinner, but it still allowed the threads to go in nice and smooth and not dry and get caught up on everything. So that's good to me. So next step, I'm going to turn this over and I'm going to start putting in the pistons. I've still got them laid out how I took them out. So this left bank will be the driver's side. Or yeah, here, I'll show you. I've got them set out like this. I set them out how exactly I took them out like this. So this left side here is actually the driver's side, and the left side is also just the driver's side of pistons. Well, actually, I can't do that yet, as I still have to put those ARP rod bolts in. I've done one set right here, and I still have to do the rest. So I guess I'll catch y'all here in just a second once I get those done. All right, guys. So I went through. I've already put the new ARP rod bolts in each of the pistons. Now, I didn't do it the traditional way of using a press to press in the rod bolts and press out the old ones. Instead, I done it the cheap way of not having a press and having a hammer and a freezer. So what I did was I put the ARP rod bolts into the freezer overnight and picked out the old rod bolts, and the new rod bolts practically slid almost in, about half an inch from going all the way in. Just used a hammer and pecked it on in. Now, is that what you're supposed to do? No. Did I damage something? It's possible. I would not recommend it unless you're on a budget and trying to do stuff as cheap as possible like I am. But I did get the rod bolts in. And the reason why I went with ARP rod bolts instead of reusing the stock ones is that these stock rod bolts, as you can see, it steps down. And everything that I've read says they come apart when you start pushing some power through them. Around, say, the 500 horsepower range, they start coming apart, or whenever you start putting boost to it, it comes apart a little faster. So I went ahead as a safety measure, went ahead and put in some ARP rod bolts. These should be good for anything that I throw at this motor. I'll probably bend a rod, bust a rod, you know, sling a rod through the block, something before these rod bolts go. So anyway, I've got all the rod bolts in and done. I've got the first piston in. Let me show you. So I've already got the first piston in, and what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to find top dead center. Then I'm going to take my digital caliper. I'm going to put it up flush against this deck surface, and I'm going to measure how far my piston is in the hole. I did not deck this block. All I did was have them mill it, make sure it was flat, and that's it. So I should have close to stock deck height as possible. And the reason why I'm doing that is because this ain't going to be no high compression motor. This is going to be a low compression boosted motor. So I want my compression ratio as low as possible. And since if I know what my deck height is, I can roughly estimate what my compression ratio will be with these stock pistons, which should measure out to about 28 cc, and my stock heads that measure out to about 78 cc. So that plus whatever thickness head gasket I decide on, I know the bore and the stroke of the motor, and I can roughly guesstimate what my static compression ratio will be, and then I can also guesstimate what my dynamic compression ratio will be. Now that I've got my cam in, I had to send the block off and make sure that the cam bearings was good, but now as you can see, everything turns nice and smooth. So that should be all good. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just set up another time lapse. I'll get back with y'all whenever I get this situated at top dead center. I think I've got it close to top dead center, but I'm going to try and rock the piston back and forth and get a average of how far it is on each side, so I can kind of guesstimate exactly how much it is in the hole. But I'm practically ready to just start cleaning the pistons and putting them all in. I've got a little gasoline can. I'm going to just pour a little gas on them and use a little, plastic brush and clean them up, put them in, put the new bearings in. But so far, I am happy with how far it is in the hole. If that is right, the 70 thousandths I measured earlier, I'm going to just go through and double check it, make sure it's at top dead center, like I said, and just try and rock the piston back and forth to get a, close estimate of how much it is in the hole on each side, like an average. So I'll set up a time lapse and I'll see y'all in just a minute whenever I get it set up. I think about right there is where it's at. I think right there's right at top dead center. And what I mean by top dead center, for anyone that doesn't know, is whenever the piston is at the very top of the stroke. And so it dwells for just a split second right at the very top before coming back down. So at top dead center, that's when the piston is at the very top of its stroke and it's about to go back down. Or about to do the power stroke or intake stroke. So let me get my dial indicator or dial digital caliper out right now. I've got a dial indicator, but me not thinking ahead, I didn't bring it, so I'm just going to use a caliper, which should be good enough to tell what it is. Just zero it out and move this jack over here. So you just want to zero it out and then put it on the side and, well, let me loosen it up first. Probably help. So zero. And then just, there you go. It's about 91 thousandths of an inch on that side and 79 thousandths of an inch on that side. So if I rock it, you see that's changed just slightly. So I've got 100 thousandths on the top and 70 thousandths on the bottom. But I could just rock the piston just a smidge. I should be able to tell if that's right or not. I think where it's at in the stroke, it's not wanting to rotate any a little bit. Yeah, so 180 thousandths right there. 93 thousandths right there. And 86 right there. And 100 thousandths right there. So I'd say an average of 80 thousandths in the hole. So that even lowers my compression a little bit more than what I was expecting. But I know that each piston is going to be slightly different. So best thing to do is whenever you get all the pistons in is go through and measure each one, preferably with a dial indicator, as it has a strong magnet that magnetizes it to the block. And then it'll have a little indicator right there that you can kind of rock it back and forth and check how far it is in the hole for each piston. But for what I'm doing, I think that will be perfect. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start putting the rest of the pistons in and cleaning them. Whenever I get them all in, I'll go back through and double check everything and make sure that all of them is in the hole about where I would like it to be. Otherwise, I'll have to order a slightly larger head gasket to get the compression down in each cylinder to where I want it to be. I know that it's not going to be exactly the same in every cylinder, as that is past the ability that I have with the tools I have and the budget I have. So as long as I can get it, within a tenth of each other in each cylinder, I should be good. Especially because I'm not pushing a large amount of boost. I'm not going for extreme amounts of horsepower, so it's slightly different compression ratio will be fine. As long as I keep that in mind, whenever I start boosting the motor, I know about what my limit will be with the highest compression cylinder. Then I can go up to a higher octane gas so I don't start getting detonation in that one cylinder. But that's enough of me rambling. I'll go ahead and start putting these pistons in, or cleaning them first, then I'll start putting them in, and I'll catch y'all whenever I start putting them in. All right, so I got done cleaning up all the pistons. All I did was use a little gas, which you don't need any expensive part washer. I mean, I'll wash all my parts in the oil pan because I've got to clean the oil pan anyway. So put some gas in there, it eats away that old oil, and then boom, 2 in 1, So what I did was I just took a soft bristle brush or hard bristle brush, a parts cleaner brush. You could take a toothbrush or anything really. And I just went through and I made sure all these ring lands was nice and clean. Since I'm using reusing the original rings, I just want to make sure everything was nice and cleaned up and where they can move freely. Then I just cleaned up some of the carbon that's built up around the piston, and the wrist pin around where that moves in the piston. That's all I really did. I mean, the pistons look really good, except for they do show signs of wear. I mean, it was supposed to be a low miles motor, but motors back then wasn't built as, I'll say, as well as what they are now. 100,000 miles, it's pretty much time for a rebuild back then, because just the old seals and the old technology, that's about where they would need a rebuild at. So I believe this motor had about 70,000 miles on it whenever my dad pulled it. So that should be about normal for wear. I mean, it's still, you can still see some of the grooves, but some of them's wore thin. There's a couple scratches on it, but again, should be perfect for what I'm working for. So I'm gonna do a little time lapse and get these, at least this bank of pistons in before I have to go to work. So I'll see y'all in just a minute whenever I get these in. And again, I'm not using any fancy tools. I'm just using a cheap piston ring expander, one of those, you know, all-in-one, can do anything from a Honda all the way up to this 455 or 500 or something. It's just one of these that has the bands around it that tighten up. It's perfectly fine. I mean, it's nothing wrong with using one of these, so that's what I'm using. I'll get it sooner or later. After much hassle, as you can see, the piston's in. I had to do it about 5 to 6 times, maybe 10 or 12. I don't know, I lost track after the third. So, anyway, I had to, moving past this, second piston's in. He'll start on the third and fourth on the driver's side, so I'll catch y'all in just a minute. All right, you guys, it's been a few days since I caught back up with y'all. So I got all the pistons in. Didn't have much issue except for a couple of them. The piston ring compressor kind of snagged up on me around the corners, but overall didn't have much issue getting all the pistons in. You know, I oiled it down. I've put the timing chain on, put the timing gear, and I've got it all in time. It's installed at 0 degrees, or what should be 0 degrees. It may be a few degrees forward or backwards. I don't have a degree wheel to tell, but from what I can tell, everything's good. Motor turns over perfectly. I've got the heads painted, which I was going to do a video on it, but it kind of got corrupted. So anyway, so what I did was I put about 4 or 5 coats of gray engine paint, kind of like a primer look, and then I put about 3 or 4 coats of clear coat, clear engine coat enamel, engine paint, clear coat. Put about 3 or 4 coats of each on it. It turned out pretty good. And what I'm going for is a really light color, so if anything goes wrong and say it springs a header gasket leak, I can see the soot on there, or if it starts an oil leak or something, I can see it dripping. That's why I'm going for. That way it's just easier to maintain and easier to keep up with. But everything's went together perfectly. I just set the head on. I sprayed the gaskets down with I think it's Permatex copper gasket spray. So I've let them both tack up. This one's dried and I'm putting it together. I've got ARP head bolts and assembly lube. I'm going to go ahead and put those bolts in, get this head torqued down, and then I'll work on the other side. I'm trying, I don't know if I've said this before, but I'm trying to get it prepared for Hot Rod Power Tour in June. I think it's the 2nd week or 3rd week of June. June 12th to 16th, so I guess the 2nd week. But, so that's why I'm trying to get it prepared for. I'm not going to put the turbo on it before then, because I'm not going to have enough time to do this. You know, I work a full-time job and I've got a little girl, so I'm trying to do this on the side, get it prepared, get it ready, get it running, then go down there. And I won't have enough time to get it done before Power Tour. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get it naturally aspirated, get it up and running. It's going to be extremely low compression. It'll run on any kind of gas I want to put in it. I'm probably going to still run the stock exhaust manifolds. That's totally fine. I am running the stock factory cast iron intake. For the life of me, I cannot find an aluminum intake for this motor. They're just not out there in my budget. So, I mean, like TA Performance has a lot, but I can't find one in my budget for this build. This is, you know, it's low cost as I can make it. You know, I'm using stock factory cast iron heads, cast iron intake, stock pistons and rods, stock crank. All I did was put a cam in it. This is the original timing set. You know, I ain't touched any of that. I'm trying to, like I said, get it running for as cheap as possible. Then I'm going to slap that turbo on it and just make good cheap power. So I'm going to go ahead, get these bolts in and torque them down so this head don't move. You know, it's only sitting on the locator dowels, so I don't want to, you know, risk it for the biscuit, you know. So, all right, I'll see y'all in just a minute. All right, guys, I got the motor together for the most part. Got my heads on, torqued down to spec. Got my oil pan on, oil pump, everything. I had a time, and I tell you, I had a time. These bolts that hold the oil filter housing to the oil pump, they was all just seized in there. And I mean seized. So, after much heat and penetrating oil and time and effort and hammer, I finally got it off. I cleaned the gears, put them back in there, put some grease in there in the assembly lube. Not much. I know you're not supposed to put, you know, much as that grease would get in bearings and stuff. So I put just a small bit, just allow it to get that suction going. And I'm also going to put some assembly lube in the oil port right here. But I got my timing chain cover on. Got my water pump. Got my balancer and my crank pulley on, fuel pump. So all I've got really left to do is put my intake on and distributor, make sure it's on top dead center and time it. I'm going to time it probably about 15 degrees for initial just to get it to hit right off because I've got to break in this cam. I just soaked it with assembly lube and I'm about to put the lifters in and push rods, rocker arms, and put my intake on. Then I should be about ready to fire it. We've got to build a little stand to start it on. We've already started on one with my 350 that went in my Camaro. But we never did finish it. I just went ahead and popped it in the car since it was a roller cam. No, special break-in procedure for that. So, all right, I'll catch y'all in just a minute whenever I get done with lifters. All right, guys, got rockers on, perfect. Didn't have any issue at all with them. I am gonna put some assembly lube over the top of these rockers, so forgot to do that. But did not have a single issue at all with it. So just got to put the intake on, put some oil in it, and distributor, time it, and I'll be ready to start it. Break in this cam, which I like using this Lucas. It's really thick. For stuff like this, to break in a cam, just smother that cam in this. Shouldn't have any issue at all to break in. It's got zinc in it. Another good, healthy dinosaur bones. So, again, all I got to do, put distributor in it, time it. Oh, it's starting to rain. Distributor in it, time it. Put the intake on. Plug up the intake. There's a few holes in the intake from emission stuff. But plug up the intake, put the intake on, put my carburetor on, which I've got a Holley 750 double pumper, I think it is. Let's see. I bought it at Swap Meet earlier this year. 700 CFM double pumper, manual choke. Whenever I get ready to put a turbo on it, what I'll do is if I really like how this carburetor will do, what I'll do is I'll find another one like it, another double pumper, maybe a 600, 650 CFM, cut the choke horn off and modify it to accept boost. I read a little trick. I don't know if it will work or not, but I read a little trick about you can let me think about this before I say it. I don't want to say it wrong. If I'm not mistaken, it was drill a hole in the top of the fuel pump, put a little nipple on there, a little vacuum nipple, and put boost on the top side of this fuel pump. And what it will do is it will help this pump under boost. So whenever you're under boost, the boost is trying to find path of least resistance, and it's trying to force fuel back through the fuel pump. So if you pressurize this side of the fuel pump, it supposedly will be good to 12, 13, 14 pounds of boost by pressurizing the top portion of this. I don't know if it's true, but I may try that just so I can, get by with a manual fuel pump. It's just a lot simpler, but that would be awesome if that worked. But anyway, I'm going to get to work building this engine stand. So I'll catch up with y'all whenever that's done. Yep, that one's good. Yep, that one's good.